We heard in that reading from St. Peter, him declaring that you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts, whom called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. If we even just let some of those words resonate within us for a while, we are a chosen race, a holy nation, God's own people. What wonderful titles, if you want to call them that we have been given. And how is Peter coming to that conclusion? He was coming to that conclusion because the people he was speaking to truly had a relationship with Jesus and recognized him, as we heard in our gospel, Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. And as I was reflecting on that, especially that aspect that we become these things, this chosen race, this holy people, by following Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, I thought, well, I came across this story that apparently was based on a true situation. Happened a number of years ago. There is a call that came in at 1 a.m. into the home of Leo Winters, which is a brilliant Chicago surgeon. It was the hospital telling him that a young boy had been tragically injured in a car accident. Dr. Winters' hands were probably the only ones in the city skilled enough to save that boy's life. Got on his clothes, jumped into his car, and decided that the quickest route to the hospital would be to drive through a dangerous neighborhood of Chicago. But since that time was critical, he decided to take that risk. He came to a stoplight in that neighborhood, and when he did, a man in a gray hat and a dirty flannel shirt opened the door, pulled him out of his seat, and screamed, "Give me your car." The doctor tried to explain that he was on an emergency call, but the thief refused to listen. He threw the doctor out of the car, jumped in, and sped off. This doctor wandered for more than 45 minutes trying to find a phone, before cell phones, so he could call a taxi. When he finally got to the hospital, more than an hour had passed. He ran through the hospital doors, up the stairs to the nurse's station. The nurse on duty looked at him, shook her head, and said, "Doctor, I am sorry, but you are too late. The boy died 30 minutes ago." His father, however, is in the chapel if you want to see him. He is awfully upset, especially since he couldn't understand why you didn't come to help. So Dr. Winters walked hurriedly down the hall and entered into the chapel. Weeping at the altar was a man dressed in a dirty flannel shirt and a gray hat, whose eyes were blinded by tears. The boy's father looked up at the doctor in horror and realized his tragic mistake. He had foolishly pushed away the only man in the city who could have saved his son. And as we listen to this story and hear the tragic aspect of it, this father didn't know who he was throwing out of the car. But as I was reflecting on it, I thought, here was this only person that could save the son, and he was thrown aside. And as we look at our lives, I wonder how many times do we do that with Jesus? It's very clear, as Jesus says in the gospel, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me." He is the only one that can save us. And yet, how many times do we throw him aside? And unlike the father in this story, we know that. The father didn't know that this was the doctor, but we do know that Jesus is the only one. And yet, how many times do we throw Jesus aside? And we throw him aside any time that we decide that golfing or playing hockey on a Sunday morning is more important than coming to Mass. We throw Jesus aside any time that we go, well, I'm just going to scroll through all my social media and I'll get to prayer later, and later never happens. We throw Jesus aside when we look at our financial situation, we paid our bills, and we say, oh, there's some extra here. Maybe I'll just donate to a slot machine instead of giving to the poor and helping those in need. Choices. It all comes down to choices. Are we going to choose Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life? Or are we going to choose the life, the way, the truths, as distorted as they are, that society sometimes presents to us? And that's what we have to decide. Because even looking at those things that I mentioned, I have no issue with golf. I have no issue with hockey. But where does Jesus fit? So maybe, yes, you do that on a Sunday morning. We have Mass Saturday evening, and throughout this city, there are other times during the day, on a Sunday even into the evening at Assumption, that Mass is available. We can choose to do both. Looking at the social media, no issue with social media. Of course, providing you're watching and looking at the right things. Why not pray first? And then it doesn't matter how long you get drifting into social media. You've already at least shown your focus is on Jesus. You haven't cast him aside. Same with the slot machines. If you think that that's going to get you somewhere, good, go for it. Let's first donate to the poor and those organizations that help them, and then do whatever you want after if you think that's a responsible thing to do. Choices. And we can be part of the world after we've making sure that we've taken care of turning to the only one that can save us. And it's interesting, in our gospel, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He doesn't say, I am a way, a truth, and a life. He's very clear. And I think that's what we need to keep remembering in our own hearts and in our own lives. Jesus is the only one. And the one, as we heard in our gospel, that has gone before us to prepare a place in his Father's home. How amazing is that? And that's what we have to always remember, because the world tries luring us down other paths. Jesus is saying, no, this is the path that's going to lead you to eternal life in the heavenly kingdom. Pay attention to that. Follow me as the way. And we show that we're following him as the way by living the way that Jesus did, as a man of compassion. And we lived as one of kindness and love, of forgiveness, of sincerity. That's the way that he lived, that humility that he brought to his life. That's how we are called to live the way of our lives if we are truly following Jesus. And we have to follow Jesus as the truth that he revealed, as we read in the scriptures, but also the truth that's revealed through his church. Truths like the dignity and sanctity of life from conception to natural death. The truth of the gift of our sexuality that is properly lived through the sacrament of marriage only. Fullness expression of. The truth that we have been made stewards of creation, and so we need to care for creation, not abuse it and neglect it. The truth that every person is created in the image and likeness of God, and they need to be treated with respect. These are the truths that Jesus in our church teaches us, and we need to follow those. But I know at different times, perhaps, we don't. Even the church has not always been faithful to those truths. That doesn't mean that the church is bad or that you or I are bad when we're not. That means we just made poor choices, and we need to make choices that right things again. You have a God that says, okay, get back on track again. You know the truth, follow it now. And then ultimately we need to, how do we plug into that life of Christ? That's where he was very kind and generous in giving us the sacraments, in particular the sacrament of the Eucharist that we get to share in each and every week. Through our Family of Parishes, these last 3 weeks, we've been having children making their first communion, the first time that they're able to share in the life of Jesus with receiving his actual body and blood. How precious a gift is that? The other sacraments too. Last night here at St. Simon and St. Jude, we celebrated baptism, a choice that the parents made to want their child, Maya, to be welcomed into that life of Christ through the waters of baptism. And they could have said, as new parents, Maya's only a few months old, more work than we thought. You know, the strange hours at night and all these things. We'll just wait till things settle down. Maybe when she's 10 or 15 or 20 or something. Anybody that's a parent knows it never settles down. They said, no, we need to do this right at the beginning of her life. We need to allow her to share in that life of Jesus right from the beginning. So they brought her to the sacrament of baptism. And we share in that life by hearing his word and what he did through the scriptures. You know, so many different ways that we can be aware of his life and are brought to share in his life. Very much, we need to keep those words revolving in our head. Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's our path to the heavenly kingdom. I know it's interesting. St. Thomas A. Kempis, the author of The Imitation of Christ, took that phrase of Jesus and says this: without the way, there is no going. Without the truth, there is no knowing. And without the life, there is no living. That's how important Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life is for us. Without that, there's no going, there's no knowing, and there is no living. Further to that, if that's all true, then there's no eternal life for us in the heavenly kingdom.